Just a bit farther. Hold together, hold together. We're not done yet.
At July 10, 1940, 9:12 hours, the English Channel. Wind howled over the gray water. Below the clouds, a lone aircraft staggered through the sky, its fuselage torn open, its right wing burning. Inside, pilot officer Lenny Miles, age 22, fought the controls with trembling hands. Fuel leaking, oil pressure collapsing, oxygen mask clogged with smoke. A second sun flashed behind him, the muzzle flare of a pursuing Bf-109. Lenny's cockpit filled with a roar. A burst of cannon fire ripped past his canopy. Glass exploded. Blood streaked down his forehead. But he held the stick steady. He was out of ammunition, out of altitude, out of time. Yet he refused to bail. Because below him, scattered along the coast, families watched from their gardens. Mothers holding children, farmers pausing mid-field, fishermen frozen beside their boats, all staring upward at the growing thunder of war. Lenny pushed the crippled Hawker Hurricane toward the enemy fighter, and for a moment, the sky held its breath. Summer 1940. Europe lay under German control. France had fallen. Norway had fallen. Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, all crushed beneath the weight of blitzkrieg. Only Britain remained. Across the Channel, in occupied French airfields, the Luftwaffe assembled the largest air armada the world had ever seen. 3,000 aircraft, veteran crews, modern fighters, endless resources. Their objective: destroy the Royal Air Force, clear the skies, prepare the way for invasion. If the RAF fell, the beaches of Kent and Sussex would soon crawl with German landing craft. London would burn. The Empire would crumble. Britain had only a small shield, a patchwork force of young pilots, some barely out of school, flying Hurricanes and Spitfires assembled by overstretched factories. They were supported by mechanics who slept next to runways, radar operators working in darkened bunkers, and foreign volunteers who arrived with nothing but determination. Churchill would one day call them the few, but among even those few were names seldom spoken. Pilots lost not to glory, but to memory. Men whose courage equaled any ace, yet whose stories faded into footnotes. By late July, the Luftwaffe began probing attacks along the southern coast. British radar, the revolutionary chain home system, gave early warning. But warning did not guarantee survival. Every scramble order echoed like a heartbeat. Bandits. Angels 15. Vector 070. Intercept. In dispersal huts, exhausted pilots dropped their tea, sprinted to their aircraft, and roared down grass-covered runways within seconds. Among them were men whose names would rarely appear in history books. Harold Fiske was a quietly spoken 26-year-old from Essex. No medals, no headlines, but ground crews remembered him as the pilot who always climbed into his Hurricane with a small smile, the kind meant to hide fear. In 1 week, he flew 23 sorties. Not a single confirmed kill, but he saved lives. When a bomber formation threatened a coastal convoy, Harold dove through defensive fire, crippled a Heinkel's engine, and forced it to abandon its bomb run. The convoy survived. Polish squadrons arrived, angry, grieving, determined. Czech pilots, exiles from their conquered homeland. Canadians, New Zealanders, South Africans. Some barely spoke English, but they understood the orders that mattered. One such man was Josef František, a Czech flyer assigned to number 303 Squadron. He flew differently from everyone else. Alone, diving from impossible angles, vanishing beneath clouds, reappearing where German pilots least expected him. While he would later be recognized, dozens of non-British volunteers remained unknown to the public, their files lost, their stories scattered across old station logs. At Bentley Priory, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding oversaw a defensive network unlike any in the world. Radar plots fed into dark operations rooms. Observers reported engine sounds over farmland. Women of the WAF moved wooden markers across a vast table map, tracking raids, estimating numbers, plotting intercepts. They were in dimly lit rooms, listening to headphones for hours, guiding fighters with calm voices as bombs fell around them. In coastal radar stations, operators like Joan Firth, age 19, spent entire nights staring into the green flicker of a cathode screen. If she missed a single blip, hundreds could die. By August, Luftwaffe tactics hardened. Wave after wave of Heinkel and Dornier bombers filled the sky, escorted by fast, agile Bf-109s. The RAF scrambled continuously. Fuel ran low. Aircraft wore thin. Pilots slept in uniforms, boots still laced. Some forgot the sound of silence. And the forgotten heroes continued to rise into the storm, knowing each sortie might be their last. On August 12th, RAF bases around the coast came under coordinated attack. Hangars burned. Communications cut. Fighters destroyed on the ground. It was the beginning of the Luftwaffe's major offensive, one that would push the RAF to the edge of collapse. And in that critical hour, little-known pilots, ground crews, and volunteers would hold the line when Britain needed them most. At August 1940, the pressure mounts. The first week of August brought a sudden shift. Luftwaffe reconnaissance reports convinced Berlin that the RAF was weaker than expected, a force on the verge of collapse. Hermann Göring, confident and impatient, issued new orders: increase the tempo, strike deeper, crush fighter command. From dawn until dusk, the southern sky grew thick with contrails. Bombers in tight formation, fighter escorts sweeping ahead like sharp-edged shadows. For the young pilots waiting on sun-bleached airfields, each roar of incoming engines sounded like fate approaching. One of the least-known heroes of this phase was Pilot Officer Arjan Singh, a 21-year-old Indian volunteer attached as an observer to RAF training flights. Though he never flew a combat sortie during the Battle of Britain itself, he documented tactics, crew reactions, and weaknesses in defensive patterns, reports that later shaped RAF training reforms for Commonwealth pilots. His presence was often overlooked, yet his calm assessments helped dozens of future flyers survive their first dogfights. He would later command the Indian Air Force, but in 1940, he was a quiet figure in RAF Blue, standing at the edge of English runways, taking notes as war thundered above. While pilots were celebrated, their survival depended on the hands of those whose names never appeared in newspapers. Ground crews, often teenagers, worked through the night repairing bullet-riddled Hurricanes by lantern light. Engines were swapped in 30 minutes. Fuel lines patched with improvised tools. Canvas stitched with numb fingers. Men like aircraftman Bernard Cole, age 18, washed the blood from cockpits before pilots climbed in again. He said nothing. He simply handed up the parachute pack, saluted, and stepped back as the aircraft taxied away. Many mechanics would later admit they never expected the pilots to return. But they prepared the machines anyway, every bolt tightened, every panel secured, hoping their work might buy a few extra seconds of life. At August 13, 1940, before sunrise, waves of Dornier, Heinkel, and Junkers bombers crossed the channel beneath a shield of Messerschmitt 109s. Their target, the heart of fighter command. Radar stations, sector airfields, command centers. These were the lungs of Britain's defense, and now they were under direct attack. At RAF Kenley, 3 Hurricanes scrambled just as the first bombs began to fall. Buildings erupted in fire. Hangars collapsed. Fuel tanks ignited, sending black columns twisting into the sky. Among the defense crews was leading aircraft woman Margaret Ryan, a telephone operator who refused to leave her post as the operation's hut shook with explosions. She relayed intercept orders until the cables burned in her hands. During the chaos, No. 303 Polish Squadron was finally declared operational. Their first scramble was explosive, an eruption of talent, fury, and precision. On their very first day, they tore through German formations with astonishing efficiency. Yet behind the triumph were men like Sergeant Miroslav Ferik, whose diary revealed the doubts and scars rarely shown. We fight for a land we may never see again, but if Britain falls, the world falls. Though some of these men would later gain recognition, many perished before the war ended, their stories left in scattered notes and forgotten. Dogfights stretched from the Isle of Wight to the Thames estuary. Contrails spiraled downward like broken glass in the sun. Parachutes bloomed, tiny white flowers against a backdrop of fire. Pilots returned with uniforms scorched, hands burned onto their control columns, faces gray with exhaustion. Yet the turbulence of August was only a prelude. September approached, and with it the greatest test. Away from combat, a small group of women risked their lives daily. The pilots of the Air Transport Auxiliary. They ferried fighters from factories to frontline airfields. No radios, no weapons, often no training on the aircraft they flew. One such pilot was Mary Ellis, who delivered Spitfire after Spitfire to bases under attack. She landed once to find the runway still smoking from a recent raid. By the final week of August, the Luftwaffe intensified pressure around the capital. Bombers veered toward Greater London not out of strategy, but necessity, their original targets now defended by fierce RAF resistance. Fighter command grew stretched. Squadrons were down to half strength. Pilots were losing weight, losing sleep, losing friends. And still the German raids grew larger. The storm clouds of September gathered, darker, wider, more relentless. At September 1st, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched over 650 sorties on the first day of September alone. The raids no longer felt like assaults. They felt like a siege. For fighter command, every hour was a test of endurance. For its lesser-known defenders, it became a test of identity, a struggle not just to fight, but to remain human in a war of exhaustion. Bill Walker was not a famous ace. He never claimed more than a few damaged enemy aircraft. But he flew day after day from RAF Tangmere, one of the most targeted bases. On September 7th, Tangmere was hit by a massive raid. Bill's Hurricane was struck moments after takeoff. Shrapnel tore into his leg, severing a large artery. He crash-landed in a nearby field, crawling clear as the aircraft burned. He survived, but he would never fly in combat again. September 7th, 1940. At 4:43 p.m., the first great wave approached London. 348 bombers, 617 escorts. The Thames sparkled beneath them like a silver road pointing toward the heart of Britain. As bombs fell on the East End, warehouses burst into flame. Oil depots erupted. Homes vanished in clouds of brick and dust. But something shifted that day, a critical error by the Luftwaffe. They turned their attention from airfields to the city. Fighter command, battered but alive, inhaled again. And in that restored breath, the forgotten heroes found a chance to fight with new fury. Far from the glamour of Spitfires and Hurricanes stood the Observer Corps. Civilians with binoculars and notebooks spread across the countryside. Men like Thomas Hale, a schoolteacher from Hertfordshire, spent 12-hour watches identifying aircraft silhouettes in the sky. He logged hundreds of sightings. His reports shaped countless RAF interceptions. But his name never appeared in official honors. Yet without these quiet watchers, Britain's defensive shield would have been pierced beyond repair. As the Blitz expanded, the Luftwaffe attempted to paralyze communications between squadrons. RAF Biggin Hill, already scarred by repeated attacks, faced its darkest hour on September 15th. Bombs smashed through operations buildings. Telephone lines collapsed. The plotting room filled with smoke. Among those inside was WAF Corporal Dorothy Slater, who shielded the burning switchboard with her own body, reconnecting lines with blistered hands. She managed to restore contact with Uxbridge sector. Her action ensured that reinforcements were deployed at a critical moment. But her role was never formally recognized. Frustrated by the RAF's resilience, Göring demanded tighter bomber formations and heavier escort presence. German pilots, who once believed the campaign would last a matter of weeks, now faced relentless opposition. One Bf 110 pilot, captured after parachuting into Kent, confessed, "They came at us again and again. It was as if every Englishman could fly." He didn't see the fatigue in the pilots' eyes. He didn't hear the tremor in their voices during mission briefings. He didn't know that many fought through grief, hunger, and nightmares. But he felt their determination. Among the most tragic and lesser-known stories was that of No. 264 Squadron, equipped with the Bolton-Paul Defiant, a two-seat turret fighter already obsolete by 1940. Against agile German fighters, the Defiant was slaughtered. On August 28, the squadron lost 6 aircraft in 1 hour. Air gunners fought bravely from their enclosed turrets, firing until ammunition belts hung empty. One of them, Sergeant Fred Barker, stayed at his gun even as flames swallowed the fuselage. He shot down a Messerschmitt before he perished. His bravery went almost unnoticed, overshadowed by the aircraft's failure. But he fought with the courage of any ace. By mid-September, more than half of the pilots flying the front line were replacements. Some had just 15 hours of training on the Spitfire. Others had never fired their guns in flight. They came from farms, cities, colonies, and exile. From London, from Warsaw, from Auckland, from Kingston, young, afraid, determined. Many did not survive their first week. Their names: Hugh Adams, Peter Dunn, Mark Ransom, Lyon Leroux, Stanislav Pfeiffer, faded into yellowed station records and forgotten grave markers. But they were part of the shield that held. September 15, 1940. The stage was set. The Luftwaffe prepared its largest assault to break fighter command once and for all. The skies over London would soon fill with more aircraft than ever before. And on that day, September 15th, the forgotten heroes would carve their place in history, though few would ever receive the recognition they deserved. The decisive moment of the Battle of Britain was approaching, and Britain's fate hung on the courage of men and women whose stories the world barely remembers. Dawn of September 15, 1940. The sun rose over Britain through a thin veil of smoke. London still smoldered from the previous night's raids. On airfields from Tangmere to Duxford, pilots walked silently toward dispersal huts, their boots echoing on dew-covered grass. Some carried Lucky Charms. Some carried letters they would never send. Most carried nothing but the weight of the day. For in the operations rooms, the radar plotters and WAF controllers were already whispering the same word. Heavy enemy buildup. Heavy formations forming over Calais. Heavy expectations on fighter command. This day would be remembered. But not all who shaped it would be. Shortly before 11 a.m., chain-home radar lit up with dense columns of echoes stretching across the channel. More than 100 bombers. Several hundred escorts. The largest morning raid yet. WAF plotters slid wooden markers across the massive operations table. Voices sharpened. Sector controllers leaned in. At Uxbridge, where Air Vice Marshal Keith Park directed the defense, a young WAF officer, Mary Molly Hood, maintained the channel map with unmatched clarity, moving markers with the speed and precision of a master chess player navigating a match for her nation's survival. Her role would never be celebrated publicly. Yet without her calm, the first intercepts would have been disastrously delayed. At RAF North Weald, black smoke from recent raids clung to the wreckage of destroyed hangars. Still, hurricanes stood ready. The scramble bell shrieked. Pilots sprinted, stumbling across cratered ground. Engines blasted to life. Propellers carved the air. Among them was Flying Officer Arthur Blake, a modest young man known for his gentle demeanor and steady flying. He was not an ace. He was not a headline. But he was one of the first airborne that morning. As he climbed to meet the enemy, he murmured a quiet prayer. Not for victory, but for courage. The German formation crossed the English coast in 2 waves. Dorniers at the center. Heinkel's flanking. Messerschmitt 110s above. A protective ring of 109s swarming like wasps. Their target, London. Fighter Command launched every available squadron. Some pilots had flown 3 sorties the previous day. Some hadn't slept. Some hadn't eaten. Yet they climbed. From Duxford, the famed but debated Big Wing began to form. 5 squadrons climbing together, slower to assemble, but devastating once engaged. Its architect, Air Vice Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory, would later be celebrated and criticized in equal measure. But among the Big Wing's pilots were names seldom remembered. Pilot Officer Richard Hales, who had joined the RAF only months earlier. Sergeant Samuel Olson, a carpenter from Leeds who had volunteered after losing family in early bombings. Sub-Lieutenant Paul Daventry, a Fleet Air Arm pilot temporarily attached to the RAF. Together, they rose into the sunlight, their silhouettes forming a great flock against the sky. History would remember the wing, but not the men who vanished in its shadow. As the RAF's fighters reached altitude, the air vibrated with the sound of engines at full throttle. Pilots tightened oxygen masks, adjusted gun sights, and scanned the horizon. A faint glimmer appeared ahead, then dozens, then hundreds. At 15,000 feet, contrails twisted into chaotic spirals. Gunfire flashed like lightning across blue sky. Engines screamed. Wings sheared off. Parachutes blossomed and burned. The first RAF attack struck the German escort fighters. Spitfires dove with predatory precision. Hurricanes smashed into the bomber formations, cannons blazing. Blake spotted a Dornier breaking formation and dived after it. Gunfire hammered his Hurricane. Oil splattered across his windscreen, blinding him. Still he held course. He fired a full burst at point-blank range. The bomber's wing tore open, spiraled away. But Blake never pulled up. His Hurricane hit the ground moments later. He was 23. His kill confirmed. His name nearly lost. Number 303 Squadron roared into the fight with unmatched ferocity. Sergeant Jan Rogowski spotted a cluster of Heinkels and led a head-on attack, cannons blazing. Gunfire shattered enemy cockpits. Bomber crews dove in panic. In minutes, they broke an entire bomber formation. Yet only a few of their names would enter history books. Many were killed in later battles. Some vanished in training accidents. Others died in exile, far from their homeland. As RAF fighters swarmed, the German formation cracked. Escorts were overwhelmed. Bombers lost cohesion. Pilots jettisoned bombs early, praying to escape. One Heinkel, engines failing, descended toward Kent. Its gunner looked out at the Spitfires chasing them and whispered. In the Uxbridge operations room, Mary Hood continued moving markers with unbroken precision. She relayed a critical message. Multiple enemy formations breaking off. Heavy losses. RAF maintaining pressure. It was the first sign that the Luftwaffe's great assault was failing. By early afternoon, the surviving bombers fled toward France. RAF fighters pursued them until fuel ran low. From the ground below, tens of thousands of Londoners looked upward as the sky, minutes earlier filled with doom, now shimmered with sunlight. For the first time in weeks, hope felt possible. The climax was far from over. A second wave was coming. The sky over London had become a vast metallic storm, aircraft crossing paths so rapidly they appeared as streaks of silver and fire. At 20,000 feet, a squadron of Spitfires from Hornchurch sliced through the German escort, cannons bursting in ripples of flame. Below them, Hurricanes from number 32 Squadron locked onto the bombers, diving again and again through defensive gunfire. Colin Marsh was not an ace. He was quiet, cautious, methodical, a pilot who rarely took unnecessary risks. But on September 15th, Marsh witnessed a formation of Heinkels slipping toward central London. His squadron was scattered. Radio silence. No support. He climbed alone. With a steady breath, he dived at the bombers, guns blazing. One Heinkel burst into flame. Another rolled violently as its glass canopy shattered. Yet Marsh's Spitfire was hit. Engine dead. Smoke pouring. He glided toward the Thames. With seconds to spare, he aimed for an open field and crashed hard, the aircraft splitting in two. Marsh survived with a broken arm. London survived because he turned the bombers away. His name would almost vanish into local archives. As dogfights raged above, bombs broke through clouds and detonated across the docks. Fires erupted along the river. The London Fire Brigade, already exhausted from the week's earlier raids, deployed every engine available. Volunteer firefighters, many too old or too young for military service, rushed into blazing streets. One among them, Edward Lyle, age 58, coordinated the rescue of civilians trapped inside a burning warehouse. He pulled 3 people from the flames before the roof collapsed behind him. By early afternoon, the second Great German Wave approached. This time, fighter command met it at full strength. From Nordholt, Tangmere, Biggin Hill, Debden and Kenley, the squadrons surged upward, Spitfires striking from above, Hurricanes from below. The Luftwaffe was shocked at the scale of resistance. What Berlin believed was a dying air force was instead fighting with renewed fury. Bombers jettisoned payloads prematurely. Formations broke. Radio chatter among German crews turned frantic. It was the beginning of the end. At Uxbridge, Keith Park watched markers move across the plotting table. More RAF squadrons were airborne than at any previous moment in the campaign. Beside him, WAF operator Evelyn Thompson, only 19, calmly announced. Her voice carried no pride, no victory, only the fatigue of someone who had worked non-stop for 30 straight hours. By late afternoon, the German formations began pulling back across the channel. Some bombers limped toward France trailing smoke. Some never made it. The last combats of the day faded into the horizon. Exhausted pilots drifted back to their bases. Some laughing, some crying, some too tired to speak. Mechanics rushed to greet them, counting aircraft, counting names, counting absences. On September 15th, Britain had held the line. But the cost fell heavily on those whose stories were never recorded. The Luftwaffe realizes the RAF is not broken. Confidence in Göring falters. German bomber crews speak in interviews, archival style, about fear and shock. Forgotten RAF pilots recuperate, showing the toll of stress, trauma, and loss. Radar operators and WAF staff practice night procedures as raids shift to the Blitz. London endures firestorms. Civilians become frontline defenders. Introduction of night fighter crews, many experimental, flying Defiance and early Beaufighters. Story of Flight Lieutenant John Cunningham and ground observers who helped guide him. Civilians with tin helmets form rooftop firewatch patrols. Little-known volunteers save cathedrals, hospitals, and schools. Women of the Auxiliary Fire Service and First Aid Posts demonstrate extraordinary bravery. Belgian pilots of No. 235 Squadron. Free French pilots flying reconnaissance missions. Caribbean volunteers who faced discrimination yet served flawlessly. Highlight: Jamaican pilot Philip Nichols, whose ferry missions kept aircraft flowing to critical sectors. Engineers and factory workers, many women, who kept the Hurricanes and Spitfires rolling off the lines. Luftwaffe losses mount. Operational fatigue cripples morale. RAF rotates battered squadrons north, replacing them with new units. Ground crews suffer the worst bombing of the Kent airfields, continuing repairs under fire. Civil defense volunteers evacuate children during raids. The quiet courage of the home front is emphasized. Hitler postpones Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. The Luftwaffe turns to full-scale nighttime bombing, the Blitz.